Thank you, Katie. Greetings, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for joining us for the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities webinar with NOAA and partners. My name is Mark Oster. I have the pleasure to serve NOAA as Senior Advisor for Coastal Inundation and Resilience. It's really a hoot to see so many familiar names among the many hundreds who are joining us here and coming together for this important discussion. And it's my sincere pleasure to welcome Camille Crain and to thank her for speaking to us on FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, also known as BRIC. Camille will discuss the design and implementation of this unique and exciting new pre-disaster mitigation program that will take effect in the fall of 2020. For a bit of background on Camille, she is the BRIC section chief within the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Branch Division, or HMA. Camille brings over 20 years experience with FEMA's HMA grant programs at the university, state, and federal level. She came to FEMA headquarters following her leadership stints in Region 6 and Region 4, where she served in HMA leadership roles. In addition, Camille was formerly the State Hazard Mitigation Officer for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Before I do a little housekeeping and before Camille gets started, I'd like to sincerely convey my appreciation for FEMA's impressive leadership, vision, and stakeholder responsiveness, and tremendously hard work that has gone on and continues to go on to develop this program. NOAA is committed to working with our partners to proactively support the success of this and FEMA's other mitigation grant programs. We're excited to have this opportunity with our partners today to build our knowledge of the BRIC program together as a baseline for ongoing strategic and collaborative work. Through NOAA's Science Service and Stewardship mission, we will continue to provide our depth and breadth of technical, scientific, and extension expertise. We will do this, as always, in collaboration with our extensive and diverse, long-standing partnership networks at all levels, including national, regional, state, and local. NOAA has the same strong focus on partnerships that FEMA does and recognizes the critical need for all hands-on-deck approach to make real progress in increasing community resilience. NOAA looks forward to working with FEMA and our partners to efficiently and effectively apply this expertise and support to increase state, local, tribal, and territorial capability and capacity, and significantly advance risk reduction and community resilience. Our convening together today is an example of NOAA and FEMA's joint commitment to these ideals. And my final note in welcoming us here is to acknowledge our shared excitement that we all have for the potential for BRIC to be a transformative force for progress in our shared journey towards national resilience. I've been deeply impressed by FEMA and Camille's commitment to innovation and partnerships that can serve to broaden the scope of hazard mitigation. At the same time, FEMA is faced with foundational challenges involved with the basic act of bringing a program of this size online. There's a clear challenge inherent in bringing a large grant program online while also seeking to innovate beyond traditional ways of doing business. That challenge of doing both at the same time is not easy. It will take time. It will involve evolution over time, and it will take partnership. NOAA and our networks are in this in support of FEMA's leadership for the long haul. Now, for a bit of housekeeping, we have a total of 1 hour together. We'll be concluding at 4:30 Eastern time. Camille will start us here by providing approximately a 40-minute overview of the BRIC program. And then we'll have a response to some questions that have been pre-received through an online survey that we conducted prior to this webinar. As Katie noted, we will not be taking additional live questions today. But if you have ongoing connection challenges or tech issues, you can enter those into the chat box, and we'll do our best to help you address them as we go. We will also be recording and posting this webinar. And as Camille will note, in addition to this webinar for us here today, FEMA is hosting a string of informational webinars in July and August in preparation for the funding opportunity launch in the fall. Camille, thank you again for your time with us here today, and I will pass the mic to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And let me start with saying thank you, Mark, for all the support you and NOAA have been giving to BRIC over the since my tenure started with the BRIC program in October of 2019. Whether it's hosting this webinar today or the details you provided us, it's been a great service to us as we at FEMA have been building the BRIC program. I'm excited so much to talk to all of you today and give you this overview of where we are as we finish up the design, or at least the first year design of the BRIC program, and move out to implementation. So with that, let's get started. Danielle, if you could flip the slide, please. So as an agenda, I'm going to take it back to the beginning for BRIC and talk about where we come from legislation. I'm going to talk about then kind of going through the steps we've had in development of the design of the program, starting with our guiding principles, moving to our policy, give you information about the rollout and timing and how funding is derived. If you're familiar with our pre-disaster mitigation grant program, it is the one that BRIC is superseding. I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about how we're different in BRIC than the PDM program. I'm going to get into then what makes a project eligible in BRIC and talk about examples of good projects that we see that's been funded through other sources. I'm also going to talk to you about the stakeholder engagement and feedback we did last summer in the 2019. We did a very large engagement to make sure that we heard from our stakeholders what they would like to see with the new program, and then leave you with some resources before we get into our questions and answers. Next slide, please. So starting back at the beginning, the genesis or birthplace of BRIC comes from the Disaster Recovery Reform Act that was passed in October of 2018. It was transformational for the emergency management community at large, but especially in the mitigation space. One of the biggest pieces of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act is Section 1234, and that is what is the section that created BRIC, the new grant program, as it amends Section 203 of the Stafford Act, where pre-disaster mitigation grant program lived. One of the pieces that makes us different from PDM is how we're funded. And so what really made this program different is that we are a set aside of FEMA's post-disaster grant funding. So, and I'll have what I lovingly call a piggy bank slide a little bit later, but basically 6% of FEMA post-disaster grant funding that is spent gets to be put into a piggy bank that is the BRIC program. So it was transformational in that instead of waiting every year for congressional appropriations to fund our program, we continually collect money from disaster spending to be able to put into a pre-disaster mitigation. Our eligible applicants include state and territories that have had major disaster declarations in the last 7 years. So as of this spring, all 56 state territories in the District of Columbia have had a major disaster declaration. So everyone just got a 7-year pass for BRIC. I will also say that another one of our other eligible applicants are our federally recognized tribes, and they are also included in that 7-year eligibility. And as I said, we will replace the pre-existing pre-disaster mitigation program that's been around since the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. Next slide, please. So back in the summer of 2019, we had a stakeholder engagement that I'll talk about more later that led to the largest stakeholder engagement or largest response to a stakeholder engagement FEMA had ever had. And that was 5,000 individual non-attributable comments and 75 agency letters. Using all that information, FEMA leadership gathered and came up with what are our 6 guiding principles of BRIC. And it is from these 6 guiding principles that we have done all of our design work to create the program. And so I'm going to run through those, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about how the program is being responsive to FEMA's current strategic plan. The first is that we are serious about supporting community capability and capacity building, and I'll talk a little bit about how that comes out in the program later. But as you notice, our name of our program is Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, and that part of that is building resilient communities is equally as important as the infrastructure. So we want to support community capability and capacity building. We want to encourage and enable innovation. We've been doing mitigation grant programs since the 1980s. And so we want to give space for communities that want to try new mitigation techniques, that want to try new ways to gather funding with partnerships and other innovative ideas. One thing I always try to talk about here is I've had some communities that makes them nervous about, well, you know, I don't know if I can be innovative enough to participate in BRIC. And one of the things we are big in the program is we want to help communities be innovative from where they are. So how are the projects you're putting forward innovative for your community, knowing that communities are at different levels of innovative? We want to promote partnerships. We know that no matter how much money BRIC has every year, it's never going to be enough to mitigate all the needs in the country, and that through strong partnerships, more can get done. So we want to be an encourager and an enabler for communities to build partnerships, both for technical needs and for funding. We want to enable large infrastructure projects. So PDM, for example, had a $10 million federal cap. So we're looking at how we can enable larger infrastructure projects. We want to maintain flexibility, and that's important for two things. One is the way our funding comes, we are 6% of disaster costs. That means from year to year, we could have large fluctuations in the amount of funding that BRIC has based on disaster activity. So we need a program that can flex with those increases in funding, potentially from year to year. Also, we're serious about being a program that continuously improves. We don't think we'll have it perfect in year one. We hope we have it very good, but we want to be a program that learns from ourselves and learns from our communities and can flex over time. And then the last one is we want to provide consistency. We are one of the hazard mitigation assistance programs at FEMA. There are two others. In addition to PDM, there's HMGP, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and FMA, the Flood Mitigation Assistance. So where it makes sense, we want to make sure BRIC aligns with those two programs as well. And in design, we've tried to take the best of those programs and put it into the BRIC program. The FEMA strategic plan has three main goals, and BRIC plays a little bit and a lot into all three of these. The first one is about building that culture of preparedness, and BRIC centers in this one in increasing the mitigation investment. The second is to ready the nation for catastrophic disasters. We hope that by funding some of our projects, we will reduce the amount of damage that certain communities get in a catastrophic disaster. And then the third is to reduce the complexity of FEMA. And that comes with standing up any grant program. We've paid attention and try to be careful as we're designing the elements of BRIC that they're not overly cumbersome to our applicants and sub-applicants. Next slide, please. So one of our biggest days in the build out of BRIC and getting it as to be not just an idea, but an actual grant program was the publishing of our policy. That was over a year in the making. It was informed by the stakeholder feedback, and I'll just give you a little clue too on the slides. In the upper right-hand corner, if you see that thought bubble with 3 people, that means that the stakeholder feedback heavily influenced what the information that's on that slide. So through the policy, we were able to publish it in the federal notice on April 10th, and the federal notice closed on May 11th. We are currently going through the adjudication of those comments. We had 147 responses that led out to a little bit over 900 comments that were individualized comments that we needed to address. So we are finishing up our work on that now. Next slide. Some of the key elements of the policy, and I don't know if you've had a chance to read it or not, but this is some of the pieces that we wanted to pull out and talk about that are in that policy. One is the funding mechanisms, who actually can get the funds, or how the funding is broken down. So the funding that will be put out this year will be broken into 3 different sections. The first is a state and territory allocation. So every state and territory will get a certain amount, and that amount will be listed in the notice of funding opportunity coming out later. They will get a certain amount to apply for mitigation projects and activities. The second piece is a tribal set aside. So we are taking a certain section of the pot. Once again, that'll be announced in the NOFO, and setting it aside for our tribal partners. And then the balance of the funds. So after we take the amounts for the state and territory allocation and the tribal set aside, the rest of the funding will be available through a national competition that is open to our applicants, which are the state, territories, and federally recognized tribes. How can the funding be used? We have really 3 different uses of assistance, and then I'll talk about technical assistance a little bit. The first is our capacity and capability building projects or activities, and I'll go more into those a little later. The second is our traditional mitigation projects. So those are our brick and mortar projects. And I shouldn't use the word traditional, because while we're funding the traditional, we also want to look at innovative. And then the third piece is that management cost. So costs that are available to our applicants and sub-applicants to manage those projects. Technical assistance is another use of the assistance, but it's actually going to be non-financial, and I'll talk about it a little bit later too. With one thing we wanted to give as a call out, as an example of something we've changed in the program, is how we deal with pre-award costs. So pre-award costs are those costs that are incurred prior to award that are necessary to be able to put the application forward. So it's not the actual construction of the project, but it might be the technical, whether it is design or permitting or the benefit cost analysis required, or environmental or historic preservation work that needs to be done to be able to lead to approval. But it's those costs that must be incurred to be able to get the application to the approval stage. So one of the things we've changed is there used to be a set time frame of when that cost could start to be incurred. So for example, in PDM last year, you couldn't incur costs before the opening of the application period. So our application period is about 4 months long. So you could only start incurring cost at the opening. We've removed that limitation. You can incur cost at any time prior to award. So it might be costs that you've had in the past already that you've incurred in putting a project application together. The cost must be eligible. And of course, if you're not awarded, you don't get reimbursed. So those elements still stay the same, but we've removed that time bound. Another thing I'll say about the policy is, if you go back or you think about the guiding principles I was talking about, I talked about maintaining flexibility. Our policy is broad on purpose, and that is to allow us to basically flex the program from year to year without having to create new policy. The policy sets up the eligibility or kind of the basic requirements of the program. So a lot of our comments, for example, talked about, well, what are your priorities going to be? And the priorities are what will come forward in the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. We will put out a new NOFO every year. So that is where we've put the full details of the program, including the competition criteria and what are the priorities of the program. Next slide. So where are we with timeline? And this is what the team and I call the pizza tracker. We were very excited to be able to move our red arrow on May 11th from the public comment period to the BRIC rollout and training that we've been doing since the early spring and will continue into the fall. Sessions like today are part of that rollout and training. I've been very blessed that multiple organizations have hosted us to be able to do webinars such as this. As Mark talked about, and I'll talk about fully later, we'll be moving into our own webinar series in the month of July. And moving that pretty much through the opening of the application period, which is set right now to be towards the end of September, October. Our next step will be, while we're doing the rollout and training, will be the Notice of Funding Opportunity coming out. And we are set to do that in the August timeframe, and we're on track, so it will definitely be hopefully August or September. And then, as I said, the grant application period then opening after that. Next slide, please. So this is the piggy bank slide. A lot of people always want to know, well, how is the money figured out? Like, how, I hear it's 6%, but 6% of what? So the way it happens is a disaster is declared, a major disaster is declared. 180 days later, so 6 months basically after the disaster is declared, there are 7 different sections of the Stafford Act, mostly in public assistance and individual assistance, if you're familiar with FEMA, that 6% of the estimate at that point will be taken. So 180 days after a disaster, we will look at 6-7 different sections and take 6% of that money, and it goes into the BRIC piggy bank. We don't look at the disasters later. We have to do it by law at no later than 180 days. So that we do it one time, we get one kind of bite at the apple. So whatever the estimate costs are at that point in the disaster relief fund, money goes into the BRIC piggy bank. And then, so if you think about it, we could be getting deposits into our piggy bank on a daily, monthly basis, depending on when disasters hit 180 days. And then once a year, we will break open our piggy bank, see how much money we have in there, and put it into the program for that year. Next slide. So how are we different from BRIC? I'm sorry, how are we different from PDM? How is BRIC different than PDM? And this will also talk about some of the pieces of BRIC. One is we changed the priorities of the program. So, and you'll see the full list of these when the notice of funding opportunity comes out, but you're going to see more references to community lifelines and infrastructure projects. Building codes are very important to the program. This was something that was actually written in our laws, section 1234 of the DRRA. You know, if you think about it, we're building a program on a couple of paragraphs. This was mentioned repeatedly, and it's repeatedly mentioned throughout the DRRA, is the importance of building codes. The other is that shared responsibility and partnerships. So once again, as I talked about before, knowing that there's not going to be enough money ever available in one single program, how do we share responsibility and how do we promote partnerships? And then encouraging innovation. So you see there in the priorities, it speaks to those guiding principles. Our second is we want to build capacity and capability at our community level. So we are looking at how can we do that by funding activities. So in the capacity and capability building activities, they are eligible under that allocation piece. So if you remember in a slide before, I talked about allocations, tribal set-asides, and the national competition. So the tribal set-aside and the allocations, we will be able to fund soft projects such as that fit into the area of capacity and capability. Examples of these include hazard mitigation planning funds. So the creation, the update, the integration, and the implementation of hazard mitigation planning. We are looking at building code projects. So can we help a community either adopt, enforce, or better their building codes? Project scoping. So that's the idea of maybe you don't have everything you need to be able to put forward an application. You don't have all those design pieces. You don't have the benefit cost. Can we give you some seed money to basically finish up your application that then you could apply in future years or maybe even apply to other programs? Partnerships. How could we give you funding to help you in your partnership work? We have had partnerships has been a piece of the programs for years, but I know my working out in regions, what I would hear a lot is, I'd love to have a partner. Can you tell me how to get a partner? So this is the funding that we can help provide to maybe do a gap analysis or to do other partnership work, as well as training is another eligible activity. We've left the aperture on that open as well, knowing that we don't know best how to build capacity and capability at a local level or at a community level. So we've left the aperture open where if there's something else that a community can think of, they could put that forward. The in-person non-financial technical assistance, we will be doing that on a relatively, or the plan is to do that on a relatively small scale this first year and see how it works out. But the idea is that we will be able to go directly into communities, either FEMA or its partners, and help with a specific resiliency need that a community has. And then one of the things we heard a lot in our stakeholder feedback was this need for, please tell me what a BRIC project looks like, or, you know, can you explain to me more about what this or that type project would look like? So we have created, and we plan to have delivered with the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the Mitigation Action Portfolio, or what we're calling the MAP. And the MAP is a selection or collection of case studies. So what we've done is we've taken about, in this first iteration, about 40-something projects of varying types, varying size, varying geography, and varying hazard. So I wanted it to be able to have something that no matter where you sat in the country, you could see yourself in. And it gives you a quick 2-page snapshot of what that project is, what the benefits of that project are, what the Lifelines cost if we had it, benefit cost analysis information if we had it, partnerships information, and a place where you can go to learn more. If that's something that project really intrigues you, it gives you where you can go gather more information than just those 2 pages. We do see that as a living document that we plan on continually updating over the years. We wanted to increase flexibility with the program. So where could we reduce limitations, increase caps, and then allow pre-award cost, as I explained earlier. So you'll see some of those when you get a chance to read the Notice of Funding Opportunity that's coming out later. You'll see those reducing of limitations, increasing of caps. And then we've been looking at how to streamline processes. One is we have a new grant system that's just coming on, but just happens to be coming on board. So it's a new grant program going in a new system, and that's FEMA Go, which is grant outcomes. It is web-based, and that is being finalized right now so that we can roll them out together. So applications will be going in the FEMA Go system. We heard a lot in our stakeholder feedback about giving more authority to the regions. So we're looking to do that through their approval of project extensions. And we're taking an element of the HMGP Hazard Mitigation Grant Program and putting it into BRIC, which is phased projects. That's an idea where you may be almost to the point of having a project fully designed and ready for approval. You just need 1 or 2 things. So it's the ability to fund those 1 or 2 things in a phase 1 to be able to get to approval. Then phase 2 starts construction. So it's a little different than project scoping, where project scoping is just the funding to basically design and put the application together. Phase projects includes both some funding to finish wherever you are in designing and getting an application ready to go, mainly designing the program, maybe permitting, or I should say designing the project and permitting. And then if approved, it goes into phase 2 construction. It comes with the phase 2 construction funds. Next slide. So everyone always asks, what makes a project eligible? I get a lot of questions of, well, you funded this, will you still, is that still eligible under BRIC? So let me start, I always want to start with all existing activities are still eligible. So our latest hazard mitigation assistance guidance came out in 2015. It included a checklist or a laundry list of project types that we would fund. All those project types are still eligible. They may have different places in the priority of the program, and that'll be spoken to in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. But everything is still eligible. In addition, we've added additional project types as eligible, particularly through other sections of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act. So you may have heard of advanced assistance in the past. That is pretty much project scoping. We just renamed it because, interesting enough, with advanced assistance, we heard in the stakeholder feedback that we should have more of it, but we saw an underutilization of it. So we wanted to rename it to be closer to what closer to what it actually is, which is project scoping. The other expanded eligibility includes the building code projects that I talked about earlier, as well as additional wildfire and wind projects under Section 1205, and the early earthquake warning under the Section 1233 of the DRA. At the end of the day, all projects must be the things that are in that blue box to the right. So this is where we talk about innovative. So I always want to drill down that these are the 5 core pieces of eligibility that every project must be. It must be cost effective, and that's done through a benefit cost model. It must reduce or eliminate risk and damages from future natural hazards. Natural hazards are key there. That's our primary mission. We love ancillary benefits or secondary benefits, but the prime benefit must be that natural hazard risk reduction. Any built projects must meet the latest 2 consensus codes. That's written in our law. So if, like, for example, if it's a building project, it's 2015 or 2018 IBC or IRC, but whatever the consensus code is for that project type, it has to be one of the latest 2. It must align with the hazard mitigation plan. So the applicant and the sub-applicant have to have a hazard mitigation plan, and it must align with it. And then, of course, it must meet all environmental and historic preservation requirements. Next slide, please. In addition to what just basically makes a project eligible, I want to talk a little bit about what are examples of good projects or what we see representative in good applications. One is that risk reduction. So are you showing that you have a clear reduction to natural hazard risk? Are you increasing resiliency in your community? Do you have ancillary benefits? Are you being innovative? All that kind of falls into that risk reduction. The second piece of that marries in. So if you have a project that we show this great risk reduction, we want to have confidence that you're going to be able to enact it or be able to implement it. So having a clear description of your grant implementation or project implementation approach. Do you have the resources necessary to carry out that project? Once again, innovation in your project planning and implementation. We want to look at or have a description of the populations that have been impacted. Are you clearly describing who the project benefits in the community directly or indirectly? And, you know, is there hopefully not, but is there any adverse impact or adverse populations affected? Partnerships and outreach. How have you outreached to the community about this project? Where have you had partnerships included in the design of this project or in the design of this application? And how do you see partnerships carried out through the implementation of the project? Is the project not only being built to what the conditions are today, but how are you looking at future conditions, whether it's sea level rise, population changes, land use changes? Are those making sure that the project that we're funding will still be effective in the future? And then once again, priorities putting on infrastructure and community lifelines. Next slide, please. So a little bit more just to stress the importance of building codes. As I've talked about, DRA provided legislation that mandated that we have support broader adoption of updated building codes. As I stated earlier, our projects must conform to one of the last 2 published codes, and we will help fund code activity. So if a community either doesn't have a code or wants to better their code, there's opportunity to read funding or receive funding for those activities. As you can tell, building codes are going to be a priority of the program. Next slide. Also wanted to highlight community lifelines. This is something that came about in 2017 and very much been used by FEMA in a response kind of framework. And the idea is that these are the critical paths that basically are been defined as the critical path, these 7 different elements that get a community back up and running after a disaster. So it's one of the ways when disaster happens, reporting happens to FEMA. We organize our reporting around these 7 different sectors to be able to tell what's back online. In the same kind of idea, mitigation, though, traditionally hadn't been using these 7 different lifelines. But if you look at them, we know that if we can mitigate the risk to any of these 7 lifelines, whether it's communications or energy or transportation, we know that we can help a community recover faster or not need to recover at all if we can, mitigate everything. So we are looking to see, and we also, I'll say, we mapped all the projects we had funded, and most of the projects we fund do benefit a lifeline. We've just never been talking in that language. But this is something we want to put a focus on, is projects that will help a lifeline, help a community lifeline either not be affected or be able to recover faster. Next slide. I wanted to give you just a couple of different examples of projects that have been funded in the past that are good, and I use air quotes, good projects for BRIC. One of them is this nature-based solution from Hoboken, New Jersey. This is in a, as you can imagine, Hoboken, New Jersey, a very urban, heavily populated area. It is a section in the community that underneath that picture that's highlighted below ground, what the funding is or what the project is to enter or have stormwater management to basically do flood reduction, and it'll hold, I forget how many millions of gallons. What that couples with is a green solution on top, or a nature-based solution on top. So you have an underground storage to reduce flood damages, topped with a aesthetic that offers community benefit in green space. You also marry this is a former pre-disaster mitigation, or PDM, project that had a $10 million federal share with a $47 million non-federal share. So it was heavily overmatched, which is a great thing in our program. They took a little bit of federal money at the end of the day of $10 million and took a lot of non-federal money to complete it. Next slide, please. Another example is out in Longmont, Colorado, which is the resilient St. Vrain, so St. Vrain Creek or river that runs through Longmont. This is a project that used nature-based solutions to reduce the flood depths or flood damages, the risk from flood damages to the surrounding community or surrounding area. It also couples a recreational, as you can see in that design drawing, there's a bike trail that goes to the side in a park. So it not only combined nature-based solutions, but it had a secondary benefit of offering community recreation. Next slide. This is a project that I personally got to tour back in August and was really wowed by. It's a microgrid installation with the Blue Lake Rancheria Tribe in Humboldt County, California. Not federally funded, but funded through a series of partners, and you can see 4 of their partners there. And it also is a whole community look at energy resiliency. So they combined a solar panel array with batteries and other techniques to basically be able to, in times of power shutoff, they can island away and keep up and running. So for example, you'll see a picture of their hotel. That hotel can serve as a hospital, and it did so in October of 2009 and is credited with saving 4 lives. They have the ability on site to hold medicines for not only their tribal community, but they also take care of the community at large, the county or the community that surrounds them, to be able to hold their medicines. They also have one of the only gas stations on site in that community that has a solar array. So they were able to prioritize in October, when they had a power outage, be able to prioritize emergency vehicles and responders being able to get gas. So it's a very much a holistic look at energy resiliency. And not only, I'll say, it has that ability to island or totally clip off the system when the system is down, but even in, which is the primary natural hazard risk reduction, it has an ancillary benefit of energy efficiency that they can cycle the power as well during peak seasons or peak usage. Next slide. And as a final example, looking at critical infrastructure such as the Children's Hospital in Miami and the way that they looked at hurricane retrofits, making sure their entire envelope was protected from hurricanes. Next slide. So I won't go into full depth here. I'll let you all read this later, and I'm hopeful, NOAA, you'll be able to post the PowerPoint or send it out to the registrants, but this is just more information about what project scoping is. So this is the seed money, as I discussed earlier, that could be applied for under the capacity and capability building projects to be able to complete the design or complete the application for a project in future cycles. Next slide. So I've talked a little bit about in those back, if you go back to the eligibility, or think back to the eligibility slide in those 5 different components, there's the benefit cost analysis. All our projects must be shown cost effective. That is a requirement. And so to facilitate that show of cost effectiveness, FEMA has a benefit cost analysis and benefit cost module. You'll see a link at the bottom. That's where you can learn a lot more about the BCA. But all our projects must have a BCR, benefit cost ratio, of at least 1. And I will want to give a plug to our group at FEMA that works year-round on trying to create efficiencies and effect in the benefit cost analysis or a benefit cost module, including they've created some pre-calculated benefits for certain project types, where some project types we've done enough of that we've been able to show that as long as a project costs under a certain amount, it's automatically cost effective, which frees the applicant or sub-applicant from having to complete the benefit cost module, benefit cost analysis module. So more information, like I said, is available there at that website listed below. And I encourage you, if you're interested in applying, please visit that. Next slide. Technical assistance is something we heard a lot in our stakeholder engagement about, I'm just going to need help in putting this together. So we're doing technical assistance in a variety of ways. A couple of them I've already discussed. One is the mitigation action portfolio that will be coming out as a guidebook of example projects. Another we'll be able to do on a very micro level is working with a small set of communities directly on a mitigation or resiliency need they have, and full information about what that is and how that you can apply for that will be available in the notice of funding opportunity. In addition, we're doing sessions like these, and we'll be doing even more of these going forward. We're offering information about the grant program. Also, with the notice of funding opportunity coming out, we are developing a suite of what we're calling program support materials. They're going to be quick 2 to 7 page documents on different topics. We have about 13 of them planned to be able to give applicants and sub-applicants more information, particularly on things that are different or new in this program that we haven't done in the past. I will also give a shout out to our regional offices with this as well. Coming from 2 different regional offices in the past, they do tons of technical assistance all the time to their applicants and sub-applicants. Next slide. Partnerships are very key to the program, and this is something that we see as a long-term that will be built over from years to years. One thing, and we see partnerships at every level, both the partnerships that we have on the federal level at headquarters, as well as partnerships that are very much at the local level. We see basically 3 different levels or 3 different types of partners. Champions are those that help us amplify our message. Service providers are those that can offer technical assistance or technical services. And connectors are those that have the ability to merge funding together. So we are creating, and I'm very happy that I've had Summer Morlock from NOAA on with me for the past few months, helping us put together the framework of how BRIC will look at partnerships. And I'm excited for our ability to start putting that framework into action going forward and helping our communities develop partnerships as well. Next slide. So I always want to give, a shout out to other programs that we have or that we know about that offer mitigation funding. BRIC is not the only source in town, and that includes within FEMA. I've talked a little bit about the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. That's a post-disaster grant program. 15 to 20% of post-disaster funding can be spent in the state, tribe, or territory where that disaster happens. Flood mitigation assistance is a grant program that is the sister program of BRIC, so we will be announced at the same time. And that's a program, of course, that focuses, tell by its name, on flood and benefits or works with the National Flood Insurance Program. Public assistance, so this is another post-disaster. This is not a mitigation program inside of HMA, but it's a mitigation program inside of public assistance, PA. It has the ability to be the largest of all of our programs, but that is where when PA funds are being spent in a post-disaster setting, additional monies can go into those projects during the rebuild to make sure that 406 or mitigation is looked at for those projects. We know as well that there is state funding and other funding outside of the federal government. So we know some state agencies have mitigation funding, as well as other federal agencies, including NOAA, the Army Corps of Engineers, HUD with its CDBG, or Community Development Block Grant, DOE, and DOT. Next slide. The stakeholder feedback, and I've talked about that throughout the presentation, but this was the engagement we did in the summer of 2019. And I want to give, this is the 5,000 non-attributable individual comments, the 75 agency letters. We took all that information and we created a report. And that is the summary of stakeholder feedback. It is available online at our website, fema.gov/BRIC. And if I can go ahead and go to the next slide, I'll show you the different categories. It basically took all those 5,000 plus comments and broke them into themes. And basically it told what were the major pieces that came out of that program or out of those comments. One thing it doesn't do is it doesn't talk about how FEMA is being responsive to those comments. You'll see that in hopefully the policy, the NOFO, the program support materials, sessions like today. It just speaks to what were the comments. It is about 70 something pages. So we did create a 4-page summary of the summary so that you can just read that as well. As far as future engagements, you heard Mark talk a little bit at the beginning about we do have more coming, especially in the month of July going forward. So we are going to have every Wednesday in the month of July for 1 hour a session on BRIC. And it's a 5-part webinar series that's going to build upon each other. You'll see there a link to click that you can register, and that is new. We are just now putting the finishing touches to be able to announce this 5-part series and open up the registration. It is going to be mostly panel discussions or multiple presenters anyway, talking about different aspects of BRIC. We're going to start with the first week of BRIC introduction that's going to look very similar to the presentation you're seeing here, with some leadership introductions to it. The second week, we're going to talk about what does the name of the BRIC program mean? What do we mean by resiliency? And what do we mean by resilient infrastructure, resilient communities? How does partnership play into it? That's going to be our second session. The third is going, and I'm very excited, the second session, we have our FEMA administrator going to come and open it for us. Our third session is going to be about BRIC and building codes. So, and really I should talk about the next 3, all have elements of the priorities of the program. So BRIC and building codes, followed by BRIC and community lifelines, and ending the 5-part series with BRIC and nature-based solutions. And I'm very happy that NOAA is agreed to be on our panel for that 5th session on July 29th. Once our NOFO comes out in what's right now planned for August, we will flip over to doing on repeat NOFO webinars for BRIC and for FMA. And this is when we'll get through all the details of the grant programs and very specific about how to apply and when things are due, such as that. So please bookmark to come join us in the month of July and August. Next slide. And I will just end with having some resources here. Once again, please bookmark our website at fema.gov/BRIC. That is where we will, as materials are available for the BRIC program, they will be uploaded there. As well as you'll see on this page, the link for our hazard mitigation assistance site, as well as we have links for our community lifelines, benefit cost, hazard mitigation planning, and building codes, where you can get more information on those. So with that, I think the next slide, Danielle, is just my thank you slide. So that completes my presentation, and I will go back to, or welcome starting to answer questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Camille. And great to see you.
You're welcome.
We have 9 minutes here with our more than 400 guests. So we can definitely field one question. I don't know if we can field more than one question, but let's do as best we can.
Will do.
So again, these questions, and thanks everyone for submitting them prior, and we've sorted those out. And the first one up, Camille, for you is, in your view, what are the best opportunities or needs for working with NOAA and NOAA partners for implementation of the BRIC program?
Thank you, Mark. Yes, and this closely aligns with that partnership slide. But there's really, as I thought about this question, there was 3 things that really jumped out at me. One is being a champion, and hosting webinars like this are part of that. But as you're getting, one of the things I'm very excited about with the BRIC program and doing webinars such as this is we get to speak about our program to our non-traditional partners. I live in an emergency management space, so those are a lot of the times the people I talk to. So this is a chance to reach out, because we know the mitigation and resiliency needs are bigger than just what's inside the emergency management space. So championing the program when information is pushed out, pushing that out with your publications, or informing your constituents about what's going on with the program. That's first. The second is you bring to bear a lot of different resources, a lot of data, a lot of information. And so as our communities are thinking about the program and thinking about putting applications together, what are those pieces that NOAA has that could help with that effort? Whether it's like in data that's available. I know as a former hazard mitigation officer, I use National Weather Service information all the time in my applications. So what is that information out there that can help? And then the third is the technical assistance pieces. You guys have been great with my team, I know, in offering details over as technical assistance for me in putting the program together. But as we mature the program and mature our partnership network and mature how we do technical assistance, I think you all have a role to play in helping us out in the field.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I concur with that. And as you know, I am personally committed to making sure that those connections happen and that we're present to support you in that way. Second question, how can small communities with maybe limited staff capacity, how can these folks take advantage of the BRIC programs? Are there specific strategies, thoughts, or approaches you would suggest for them?
Absolutely. I grew up in a town of 900 people. I understand rural quite well. We wanted to make sure that the program didn't focus too much or didn't benefit overly just larger settings. So I will say, as you see the notice of funding opportunity come out, we've tried to put a couple of pieces in there to level the playing field, so to speak. So rural has an equal opportunity, or small has an equal opportunity. On top of that is, I would say, the use of the CNCB, the capacity and capability building. We're offering funding for projects types that we've never offered before to help communities grow, or to help communities increase their resiliency. We're increasing the types of things we can do under mitigation planning. We are adding the partnership monies in. We're adding training monies in. There's different mechanisms under those type of projects, those soft project monies, I call it, that I think can really help small, that they can help them build their capacity and capability. And then there's the direct technical assistance. That is going to be, like I said, at a very micro level. We're not going to be able to do a lot of communities this first year, but I would say that's another opportunity for a community that has lower capacity to put forward where they don't, it's a smaller reach. It's not, doesn't need as much in the application form, more come on that with the NOFO, and it doesn't have a financial commitment. So one thing that's not in my presentation is our grants are cost shared. It's 75% federal, 25% non-federal. That non-federal can be made up of donated or in-kind services. It doesn't have to be cash. It can be used for other grant funds as long as they're non-federal. We do have a definition for small and impoverished that gets you a 90% federal, 10% non-federal. And one of the kind of changes from PDM to BRIC is we have eased access by reducing the demands on the definition. So we took out one of the criteria. So now there's only 2 criteria for small and impoverished. One is you have to be a population of 3,000 or less. But that does give you an increased cost share of 90% federal.
Terrific. Maybe we can squeeze one more question here, 60 seconds or less. In a moment where you are working so hard with your team to just get this thing up and on its feet, I wanted to invite you to look onto the horizon, be a bit aspirational in your hopes, and share what do you think, what do you hope BRIC looks like in 5 years, or what are its components that you would I think see as part of a successful implementation?
Right. Thank you for saying it doesn't have to all happen in the first year. One thing is 20-year career of working with these grant programs. I've been given a really awesome opportunity to lead the team to design this one, but there's so much that we want to be able, I want to be able to say that BRIC had a place in helping communities become more resilient. I want to see that as having higher capability and capacity in both our applicants and our sub-applicant pool. We're looking at how we can, in future years, add different mechanisms into the program. So we're still looking. We've done a lot of review under other federal grant programs, but we're still doing that to see if there's elements of that we can put into the program. One of the things I have is, for example, maybe a credentialing program to help build capacity so that we know our grants are being managed by people who are trained to be able to manage them. The partnerships piece is probably one of, as I look to 5 years, that's where I am most excited about how it can grow. That BRIC can not only be a grant program that's just the funding it hands out every year, but how it has a role in helping to build strong partnership networks for resiliency across the nation, so more projects are getting done. We know that American Society of Engineers in 2017 gave the Infrastructure of America a D+ rating. And how do we change that? We know BRIC on its own can't do it, even though we have the name infrastructure program, it's not enough money. But how can we partner with others to change the way that infrastructure, resiliency, and communities look in the future?
That's terrific. Those are, I think, inspirational pieces of what we're all striving for. And I'll see you next week, and I'll see you in 5 years when we get there. We are in our last 60 seconds together. So Camille, thank you again for your presentation, your time today, your partnership on this, and your leadership. I also want to thank Katie Rowley for the online hosting support. Thank Danielle Doss, Alex Chutello, and Summer Morlock for their vision and their leadership in helping bring this discussion together. And finally, thank you out in the audience for your interest in each of your individual ongoing leadership efforts across the country, all of which are serving to help our communities and our nation become more resilient. There is not one of us that can make this journey alone. It is a pleasure to be in community with you. Thanks for joining us here today. Thank you guys, and be well. Take care.